Hello and welcome back to another episode of Raise the Vibe with Liz. I'm your host, Liz Peterson, and today I'm going to be interviewing Barbara Burgess. So, for those of you who aren't familiar with Barbara, she's written a book called Enough, and it's a great book that we're going to jump into. But for those of you who aren't aware of Barbara and her book Enough, Barbara is an author, mother, executive who's embraced the beautiful messiness of life. She founded Corluma. Core equals heart, Luma equals light, a Chicago-based consulting firm. Wrote and performed a one-woman show, The Extraordinary Experience of Being Ordinary, and most recently wrote her first book, Enough, Finding Peace in a World of Distractions, Hustle, and Expectations. Known for her humor, vulnerability, and practical wisdom, Barbara shares simple shifts to help people remember they are enough and have enough. Her ego is kept in healthy check by two teenage children and career adventures that include selling candy bars for Nestle Foods, launching Grainger into internet commerce, a brief marketing stint at the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, and most recently overseeing operations, marketing, and finances as the COO of a nonprofit. Like all of us, Barbara says she's still figuring it out. Barbara, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to our conversation. I was telling you at the beginning, before we jumped on, that I was just in Scotland, and a lot of the women that I bumped into, going in and out of doors and such, said sorry. And it happened over and over and over again. And that was a path for me to find my sorry where I was saying it all the time, my yeses and my nos. Back in like 2016, 2017, there was a bunch of us women working together, and we realized like we said it all the time to each other. So we vowed to stop saying it. Now, I want to ask what I always ask all my guests first, though. What brought you to this moment right now in writing this book?
Um, Really, there was a transition point as I left my last job. I had been there for 22 years. And, it's interesting. I was just reading some journaling from 2015, and it really starkly underlined how I should have left a long time before that. And so, but in that moment, in that transition, I said, I was so filled with busyness that I hadn't created any space or cracks for myself. And so when I left that company, I had chosen that I was going to, start this business, which was a whole journey and expression itself. But what I found was actually almost the side results of having those cracks in the sidewalk is where the sense of enough sort of entered my life. In the book, she's actually a character. She's an entity to me and as real as anything else. And so that started happening as the experience that I was having. And I would be in a coffee shop, and all of a sudden these thoughts and journals and reflections would come down, and I just kept capturing them to the point where I was like, I think I'm supposed to write this thing, and I think the one woman show kind of came about in the same way. And I think, in that space of having created some possibilities, there was like room for something to emerge that hadn't been there when I was on a much more narrowly defined description of, success, achievement, or what winning was going to look like.
Wow, that's great. And what was the process to like, you're writing these notes, you're wondering, should I write this book? How did you go from, just jotting these down to, wow, has this done something for me and can this help others?
I really feel like, and I don't say this lightly, like this was not a journey in my hands. So, and I have said to folks since I don't even know that I felt or feel that it's for others, although I appreciate that hopefully will serve. But when I actually published the book, I had this big realization, and this is just, recently, that I actually published it for me. And that those lessons about comparison and that sense of enough and having boundary, all the things were to become alive in my system in a deeper way. So I had tastes of them, and that's what was getting introduced to me. But then I felt like you're supposed to put this out. And the beautiful part about enough is I don't have to overthink it. I don't have to have too much reasoning and wisdom behind it. I just need to respond to that deepest, most profound inner sensing. And the sense was like, you're going to put it out. And I even had to almost like cognitively argue with myself, like, it's not that I've worked with authors before. I know how to do it. I know the mechanics of it, but the time it takes and even the draft that I publish, like it's not perfect. I would change things. I would do it differently. And the whole message was like, yeah, that's actually the book. That is the point, right? It's like, no, we're not going to wait till it's perfect or till you've refined it or till there's an objective or till all those things. It's like, do it. We have lots of other stuff to get through, right? And so, I felt compelled in a deep and profound way. And there is something, and this is, something that I've been discovering lately, the more that I develop this sense of enough, which to your point is the place that I don't have to say I'm sorry because I get to exist. I get to be here just as I am, no changes. And the more that has built within me, the less I have to figure out the rest of it. And I was just talking to somebody earlier today about this. It's moving from I need to, I should to I get to. I get to publish a book. I get to put on a one woman show. I get to run a business. I get to change my mind. I get to draw a boundary. I get to try an exercise routine. I get to quit an exercise routine. Like, I feel like it's hugely opening of a door to possibilities I didn't even know were there.
Mm. That's awesome. I think enough is an issue for a lot of people based on how our society was built, right? And I'm going to say, especially women, and I'm not meaning to exclude men. I know men feel this too because they have a lot of pressure. But my journey, as a woman and seeing other women in my life experience this and feeling not enough, that has been, one of my narratives to work with and overcome. How does that show up for you, Barbara?
I mean, it's shown up for as long as I can remember, right? It's the reason that all of this stuff was now 20 years ago. Because I think, to your point, it is so systemic, it's so societal. And you're absolutely right that much more so with women. When you're living in a patriarchal structure, and you don't see women just creating, doing things, being entitled, taking up space, doing what they want as the norm, because there are plenty of them as exceptions, but not as the norm. And so when you don't see that, it is difficult to make those choices, right? And I think back to when my daughter was little and I took her to see some cartoon movie, and I think she was 7. And I remember we walked out and she said, I just want to cry. She had counted the number of, there was like a superhero team and there were like 5 of them. And she's like, Mom, 4 of those were boys and only 1 was a girl. Like, immediately, that recognition of what she saw had translated into her little mind immediately. And it was so stark for me. So, to that point, like, we can kind of cognitively know that as women, it is an uphill challenge, right, at some level. But I really saw it, and now I can't unsee it, right? Even as an author, I have a lot of authors I love, and I look at like the self-help sections or the spirituality sections, and I'm like, how is it that the bestsellers are still this cadre of men? And I don't mean it, to your point, against men. It just shows when we are, at least 50, if not more percent women, and we don't see that represented, that has a profound impact. And so, to that point, I think, again, the message has been there all along. I think over time, I keep peeling back my own layers to the onion to see how prevalent it is. And I think it makes me more committed to putting this stuff out so that, like, if only one other person thought, oh my God, that book was okay, I could do that, great. Then I hope they go do that, because then we have more people doing that, right? Which is the point of it. And so I almost feel like a responsibility in some ways to create, to play, to do all the things in the ways that I didn't see, that my little spirit DNA from birth was like, oh, wait, it doesn't have to be this way. Like, we could be nice to each other. We could get along. We could have a world that works in a different way. But then you keep seeing and getting reinforced these other messages over and over and over again. And, you become disheartened to think, well, that's not possible. Well, what was I thinking? And I feel, with this presence of this, concepts coming into my life, like a new permission to be unleashed in a way that I just didn't know. So again, I think it started early on. I think it's systemic, and I think it's just reinforced in so many ways. And I'm human, so I do that unconsciously with my kids too. I just try to catch it more often.
Yeah, same here. For our listeners who are going, well, gosh, not enough. Like I haven't really looked at that part of myself. What would that look like in me? What would you say to them?
So just like Enough became a character, like she truly entered my life as this beautiful presence, so did Not Enough. I mean, and ironically in the book, she Enough is she and Not Enough is a he. And it's more about those, systemic messages and things like that, not about men in specific. But um, those messages were the normal soundtrack, right? And so it's not that I wasn't aware, I felt like not enough, but what really helped me was truly to turn him into a character. So like I can kind of see him in my mind's eye. And, he's somebody who like, would have appeared like in the corporate business suit back in the moment, but like it's all faded, tattered, is almost jester like, it's outside myself. And so that not enough voice is running all the time, but by taking that out and making it a character and naming it, I can have more of a distance, right? When I don't separate that out, that not enough is me. And there's a part in the book I start with a poem and I end with a poem, but I'm in this inquiry, and it was a poem I'd written a long time ago. It was like, how did I end up creating this whole monument, homage, altar to not enough? How did I design my life around that, right? And so to really take him out and put him over there and say, no, 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 I am not you. You are not me. That is an entity that I choose not to take their advice. And I'm not like I haven't eliminated him by any stretch, but I pay attention in a deeper way. And so that has created a good, healthy dialogue, but almost like having a little distance and humor, like, oh, I see you there again. Like, again, the concepts are there with me all the time. I even had a space this weekend where, my son had gone on this trip and, he went with a friend to this amazing space and it was gorgeous. And all of a sudden I started that comparison thing again, like, oh, I haven't built that. I didn't do that. And I'm like, oh, there you are, sweetie. Look at you go. Uh,
A little bit more about comparison because that's a big part of it. When we're looking at society and we're judging ourselves against everybody else.
Yeah, I think so. There's a chapter, and in it, I say comparison kills. I know there's so many beautiful sayings about comparison being the thief of joy, and a number of other things that way, which I think is so true. But for me, it truly felt like life and death in that way because I talk about these experiences that I had where I would feel beautiful and lovely and human in one moment, and in the next moment, as soon as that comparison came in, it was like I was the worst piece of whatever on the planet, right? And I tell a story in the book where I had, with my body, it's always been a love-hate relationship for many, many years, and I'm increasingly learning to love every aspect as she exists. And so I had bought these, cream-colored vegan leather pants, right? And I had worn them out, and I was pretty proud of my outfit. I just felt lovely, And then again, I wasn't thin like I had been, blah 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 blah. I was like, no, in this size body, right? And I'm somebody you got to know who's like spent most of her life in gray and black, And so I had this outfit bubble. I'm sitting in a coffee shop, feeling all delighted with myself, and then a woman walks in who, no exaggeration, looks like a model from Paris. I mean, straight off the runway, of course, in vegan leather pants that are cream color. I mean, like, what are the odds, right? And immediately I just went down the toilet, right? I was like, oh my God. I mean, it was like I just want to cry. Like I was not too allowed to exist because she was existing, because her legs looked better. She looked more fashionable. She was thinner. Somehow I was truly erasing my own existence. And that's the profound, really deep place where I'm like, that literally kills me. My existence is erased when I get in that space. And so in a matter of a moment, I had gone from feeling special and present and delighted in myself to non-existing. And so for me, that comparison, and I talk in the book about little c and big C comparisons, but that big C comparison where I really afterward feel less than, bad about myself, down, all those kinds of things, like it is very, very dangerous. And so it's learning to notice, right? And learning to pay attention to it. And and make a change. And I talk about the ladder of comparison, and my metaphor there is if you've got a ladder that's on the earth and it stretches up into invisible, to I can't see it anymore. And in comparing, what you realize is there's always a better and a worse, right? So there's always somebody above me and somebody to below me. And so in that moment, man, she was rungs and rungs above me on that ladder. If everybody can only hang on to one rung and somebody's above you and somebody's below you, right? But if you stretch that metaphor out, there can only be one at the top of that ladder because it's a ladder. Every rung only holds one. Either every person's better or worse than, right? That's what that comparison does. And that metaphor, you don't win. Even the person at the very, 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 very top, let's say they're the most wealthy person in the world. First of all, the market could change and they shift down. But second of all, it doesn't even mean that in relationships they have it all. It just means in that one category. And so for me, that whole comparison thing, my only answer to myself was there's no winning. You just have to like let go of the ladder and step off. And so for me, it's like I'll catch myself in that moment. That's that not enough voice beginning to compare. And I'm like, oop, 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 nope, nope, we don't do this. Just like the sorry, we don't say that. We don't get on that ladder of comparison. We just off onto something else.
Nice. I like that. Just get off of it. And is how beautiful that you can catch
Yeah.
yourself in the moment, right? So explain to our listeners the difference between those little C's and big C's that you write about in your book.
Yeah, so the little C comparisons I say when you see really two good-willed athletes go at it, in a court, and you guarantee they watched the game tape of their opponent. They compared all over the place to see where's their shot, how do they approach, could I do it better? Is there what like they compared a lot. But when it comes time for the match, they put it all out there. Somebody wins and somebody loses, and at the end of the match, they high five and they move on. Like to me, those are the little C comparisons, meaning they serve to better me. They serve to uplift me. They serve to, move me forward in some aspect. Or even if you think about, I love home repair. If the floor is crooked, like this spot doesn't meet this spot, right? So it's not level. Oh, I want to, in comparing those two levels, let's make them even. Or I go to a keynote talk and I'm like, wow, I love their PowerPoint better than mine. I wonder if I could, find some imagery like that for my next version. Like those comparisons, those little C ones, it truly is noticing a distinction and using it to move yourself forward and improve yourself. And again, I say in the book, like, I know that there are some people who only exist in the little C comparisons, and I say, bless you. I wish that's not me, so those little C comparisons are totally safe. But the big C comparisons, we know when we're doing them, if afterward we feel less, our energy's down, we feel disempowered, there's anything about that that makes us less than, that's a big C comparison and it doesn't serve us. If it served us, that would be a different thing. But, there's, mistaken beliefs that we have that if I do that, I'll kick myself into shape. Then I'll da 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 da. Kristen Neff has some beautiful research on self-compassion, and that it's the opposite is true. The kinder I can be to myself, the less I can do those criticisms, the more I can actually achieve and accomplish, which has been my experience, right? Even this period of time, the more I have increasingly accepted and felt like enough, that allowed me to create a book, launch a business, and do a one-woman show in like a short period of time, because it doesn't matter if it's good enough. It doesn't matter if somebody else did it. It doesn't matter if I'm not trained. It doesn't matter. I just get to.
Ah, so true. I was just talking about this last night with a friend. Like we put all these stops on ourselves, and what we don't realize is we're exactly enough, exactly how we are, exactly with all the tools and wisdom and knowledge that we have right now in this moment to do what we need to do. And that's a really important,
Yep.
thing to realize, about ourselves, especially when we're wanting to do.
Well, and I think it's Yeah, and I think it's revolutionary, right? And I'm going to say for women in particular, is revolutionary to say, because again, you look at the media is telling you, look younger, get this cream, get more money, da, da, da. We're constantly bombarded with those messages, which isn't a news flash, but I will say it's been a profound embodied flash to go, oh, I really don't have to listen to that. I really don't have to give it any validity. I really don't. And to me, that is such a radical way to exist.
It really is. You talk about also, how this actually affects our body. Can you talk a little bit about, what you discovered and how, our belief systems and things like really affect our physical self?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so much research about the mind body connection, right? And about how much that can impact. And I think a lot of that, that toxicity when we're creating it internally, right? It's unless we release it, it's sort of trapped in our system, right? And so for me, the more uh, negative I was to myself, the more self-criticizing, et cetera, like, okay, that increases my blood pressure. That, literally shoots my cortisol up. I can feel myself in my body being more ungrounded, less, less settled. My nervous system is activated at those moments, right? All of the research that's been done on the vagus nerve and all of those kinds of things to know what is it like, what are the health benefits of literally just having a settled nervous system? And they're huge. It's just huge, the impacts. And so to really understand that, even though this might be what I feel like is some innocuous statement I'm saying to myself, no, I'm making myself less healthy every time I allow that not enough voice, every time I don't give myself permission. And there's, again, on the opposite side, plenty of research to show that when we're expressing ourselves, having fun, creating, doing all those kinds of things, our whole heart system gets in rhythm. Everything settles into a more optimal way of being. We digest better. I mean, you could just go on and on and on for the implications. And so, I often, for work, will teach workshops on emotional intelligence, but the part I love the most about it is the embodied part, right? To really know that wisdom, when my body is trying to tell me something, it is not just a abstract thing, it is a real thing. When my gut clutches like this and everybody's smiling in a meeting, but I know something's off, something's off. It's like it is telling me because it's receiving data that I'm not getting. Again, they know now that the brain or the heart and gut have independent neurons that don't start with the brain. They start there and it's two-way communication. And so there's this wisdom we have that if we honor it, which again teaches us, hey, what do I feel like doing? What feels like joy? What feels like fun? What feels like play? It doesn't mean I don't have to do the hard things. I do those too, right? I don't like, doing my bills. I don't like any of that kind of stuff, but I don't have to suffer through it at the same time, right? I get to, be grateful for the fact that I, have enough money that I have to pay bills. Like what a beautiful thing that is, right? So really, I think paying attention to those internal monologues, which is such an ongoing challenge for all of us, I think we'd all be healthier, happier if we could really notice.
Yeah, and it not only relates to what's going on in our physical body, but also our outer world too. Like if we're not paying attention to when something doesn't feel right, like if it feels off, it is off. And that goes, just as equally to internally as externally. Like if you're, speaking with someone and something just feels off, you have to trust that and follow like your inner guidance system.
Well, and that's in it, I do some executive coaching. And so as part of that, like I joke and I say, particularly with women, a lot of times all I'm doing is being a mirror and saying, yeah, you're right. Like whatever your instinct is, you're right. Because I think we've spent so much time dismissing that wisdom, ignoring it, not paying attention to it. It's there, it's alive. I say in the book, like our body has this German engineered, magnificent scientific instrument that can guide us to a sense of rightness and safety and all those kinds of things for us. It's just that we're in the habit of ignoring it because that's what we've been trained to do. And I think, there is an unconscious fear in the society of how empowered we might be were we to grab hold of that wisdom and really live into it. And I think that's the piece that I'm most hopeful and excited about is, the things I've done in a short period of time with paying attention and having that sense of enough and not caring what folks think as much, right? That has been unleashed me in a new way that I'm like kind of I feel, at this stage of my life to feel like you're at the beginning of the adventure is pretty darn cool.
It is, and what a great adventure you're on. You've mentioned a couple times permission, and I think that plays a huge role. So talk about, to our listeners about like how do we give ourselves permission to step into these spaces?
I do believe, for me at least, again, I can only speak from my experience, but it started with that increasing self acceptance of that enoughness, right? So the more that I can do that, the more I do give myself permission almost by default. So if I think, oh, I can only put on a one woman show if I'm theater trained and there's a purpose for it and I have an outcome, then I'm all of a sudden constraining my options and opportunities. I'm decreasing the possible playing field that I can operate on. If I say, oh, if I write a book, I have to write a book to be a bestseller. Well, then that decreases the playing field. Like I have to blah 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 blah. But the more that I can say, no, none of that matters, right? The more I can have that sense of enough in my life, then all of a sudden there is permission to truly do anything, right? Now, for my own morals and values, that's within that framework, within my own framework of what I would consider my authenticity, my value set, all that kind of thing. But I don't feel the constraint I used to feel. It doesn't mean I have to do anything, by the way. It just means I get to if I want. And that can also be fluid moment by moment. I used to do these getaways for myself every quarter that I started when my kids were little. And I found at the beginning that I didn't know how to spend that time. It was like there was so much pressure to relax, have fun, rejuvenate, blah, 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 blah. And what I started doing is I would take a notepad and I would write on there every possible thing I could do. I didn't have to do any of it. And then what I would do is I would get to, rent a little cabin. I'd get there, I'd throw down my bag, and I would look at the list and I would say, is there anything on here at all that brings me joy in this moment, just the split second? It's like, oh, yeah, I feel like cooking something, right? And I'm not even somebody who cooks usually, but I'm like, I go to the grocery store, I get some stuff, I make something, and then I stop feeling that way. And I'm like, meh, that's good. Store it away, throw it away, eat it, do whatever, move on to the next thing. But what I learned later was what I was doing was training myself to tune in to those sort of ignored deepest desires with nobody else's noise around. And so the weekends didn't even have to be successful. I was just practicing being with myself at a deeper level. Now, those weekends for me now are so nourishing because I don't feel that pressure for anything. I know that I get to do anything, and then it's just sort of fun to see what's going to wind up happening. And I end up, finding myself restored in a lot of ways. But it ended up being a really practical way to learn to tune into the body instrument, that gave me permission to do anything, permission to change my mind in a moment and change it back.
God, that's awesome. And what a great tool to put in our toolkits, everybody. So, and it also like gives us permission to like get rid of the shoulda, coulda, woulda, and the have tos
Yeah.
and to look at life differently. Really.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the thing I'm working actively on for the moment is changing that shoulda, coulda, woulda to get to. So I get to go walk and get to exercise in my body. I also get to not walk and not exercise in my body. I get to do both of those. And so the only interesting thing is what feels the most right now. And sometimes when I say the most right, sometimes it is doing the scary thing, right? Like, oh, and for me, this is mostly being in public. Like I love public speaking, but I am an introvert. And so, sometimes I'll just have all of a sudden this thought leaps up like, oh my gosh, I want to tell them how attractive they are. Like some woman sitting next to me, but like I would never normally do that. That's so awkward. So it's like going, okay, I may not be comfortable, but that's what my body wants to do right now. So I'll say it. And then all of a sudden we have this beautiful moment, right? So it's not that I'm comfortable making all those choices, but it is what's most tuned in to the desires that are live and moving at the moment.
I think this really like is a great segue too into the yeses, right? Because so often, as you talk about in your book, we can, over yes ourselves. So talk about
Yeah.
the role that's played in your life.
Yeah, well, in that I talk about the small yeses and small no's and big no's. So what I learned over time was I got better at making a stand for a big no against things that violated my boundaries, my ethics, my morals. So if somebody truly did something that was outrageous. The conformity girl who would have laughed at a joke that's not funny didn't. It wasn't those kinds of things. But I was still drowning in the small yeses, meaning if I really hold myself as enough, then this is this beautiful, precious life force that's here for a moment, right? And so, how do I want to use that life force? And so, I found myself saying yes to things that really weren't a fit, but they were innocuous. They seemed simple and small. So, somebody's like, hey, I got you this free book. Okay, it's not a book I want to read. I don't want to keep, et cetera. But I would feel obligated to put it on my nightstand, feel obligated to read the thing, even though I don't want to, right? And so, or somebody would invite me to a fundraiser. Hey, I have an extra ticket. Are you free Saturday? Well, those are different things than do I want to go, right? And so I would, by almost obligatorily, look at my calendar. Oh, I'm free. So the answer is yes. But I don't, I work not to do that anymore because those small yeses cluttered my life, right? They would fill up my calendar, or, we have a big home. Somebody asks you to store some stuff that's taking up space. Just because I have the space doesn't mean I need to allocate it to somebody else's stuff. Just because I have room in my calendar doesn't mean I need to come to your event. Just because you gave me something as a gift doesn't mean I have to keep it or do anything with it. I can just appreciate the fact that you thought of me, savor that, and give myself permission to do nothing with it. And I think that's the really essential part if we're going to keep feeding this sense of enough and feeding that, radical way of existing is we have to catch ourselves when we're in those small yeses because they truly will crowd out anything else that's possible.
For someone who is a yes person and they haven't found their no, what would you recommend that they do with that? Like, okay, I'm caught in this vicious cycle. My calendar is full. What now?
Well, I'm going to break all the rules. My own authenticity in some ways. I think when you're really in an extreme space, having been in an extreme space, like at the beginning, make up an excuse. Fine. Like that's fine. If you want to say I have another obligation, but your other obligation is to sit with yourself on the couch, fine, right? You can do whatever feels most gracious at the beginning, but to me it's a muscle, right? And so, I believe you start small and you do repetition and then you build your way up. And so it may start there, but then it can move into, hey, thanks for thinking of me, but that's not a fit for me, or that doesn't work for me at this time, but I appreciate it, right? I always say with the no's, I do appreciate that somebody wanted to include me, thinks, values me in some fashion, that they're offering something. So my honest part of that equation is to have a formula that says thank you, because that just thank you for seeing me, right? So the thank you, but then to have a variety of things that you can say almost in your back pocket. I also tell particularly women when they're beginning to work on this skill, you never have to respond right then, right? Because sometimes we're just doing it out of a social obligation. So to pause and say, let me get back to you. It's not, let me see if I'm free and get back to you. Let me get back to you. And then move yourself away where you can really tune into your body and say, does this feel like, people talk about the full body yes. Does this feel like a full body yes or no? If no, it's fine to say no, right? And again, you can have a gracious response over time. The more that I have practiced this for myself, I say in the book, beautiful boundaries, zero apologies. I don't feel the need anymore to tell people what I'm doing or why. I just don't feel that need, but that took practice to get to. And to be straight, I did have some, kind of close friends that were upset, when I first started doing it. And my personal belief isn't because I was doing something horrifically wrong. I think it's stirring for us to be with someone reflecting back the thing we're not doing that we want to do for ourselves. I think that can be super challenging. And so, I had somebody who had asked me to do something that I had done in the past. And I said, thanks so much for including me, not a fit for me. Well, I got an earful later about who did I think I was? I was so selfish and self-centered and not a good friend. Like I got the whole litany. I thought, well, isn't this interesting? And it causes me to discern more on relationships. Like if the only, reason that we're in a deep relationship is because there's something transactional that I'm giving to you that has a preset thing, then we're actually not in a relationship because I'm not here. I am an object for your needs, which is very different than you just honoring me as a human with all my desires and boundaries and things like that. Now, again, those have shifted over time, I think, because friends got used to me claiming my space. It's not that it probably doesn't upset them still, but I have friend who's even funny about it. She'd asked me to go to something. No, she didn't ask me to go to something. We were both invited to something else, and she had texted me and say, "Are you going?" And I said no. And she said, "Okay, just out of curiosity, is this a no because you have an obligation, or is this one of your no's?" So it's just this sweet little like, I love that you asked, because she was kind of learning alongside in some ways. So, but I think, from a practical perspective, you got to work your way into being in those spaces and know that you might get some backlash. But at the end of days, as your vision point to know, I really truly don't owe any. I mean, I feel an obligation to keep my children alive and thriving and in decent shape, right? I birthed them. I have an obligation there, but I don't have to do a lot more than that. I get to choose how I want to parent. I get to choose how I want to be a friend. I get to choose how I run my business. And those are my choices when I'm sitting in that, space of enough. And I get that it could make other people uncomfortable, but that's not my business. I talk in the book about staying in your energy lane, like that is not my business.
Oh, I love that too. And this is another conversation that I was just having recently. It's like that self-care versus selfish. Like the world has told us, like, if we're doing these things, that we're selfish, right? But it's really self-care. And you're speaking to that self-care, you're speaking to the boundaries, you're speaking to having a voice in your life. And I think that that's really important. And I love the story that you shared. It was so sweet that your friend asked you, like, is it this kind of no or this kind of no? Because she's learning also as you reflect to her what that looks like for you, then she can learn from you. I think that's a really sweet story that you shared.
Well, and I love that you said that about selfish. So literally, this was in the last 2 weeks. I have a therapist, and I had said something to her about, this next period for me, I'm really focusing on being selfish. And she reframed it. She's like, "Well, I think that's more what you're saying is self-focused." And I said to her, because again, it's just the space I've gotten to. I'm like, if it makes you more comfortable to say self-focused, you can. But like, I'm reclaiming selfish. Like, what the heck? Like, I am sorry. Do you know how many selfish people I have worked for, served, all those things in my life? Like they get to be, right? And again, the word itself, to have a sense of myself and to be inwardly focused as my driving force, like that is not harm. Again, maybe if I were a different human, but at the end of my days, what most matters to me, like if we were truly there, I want to know that I was a net positive on the planet. I want to know that the world was a little better because I was here, right? So somebody like that being selfish, like, no, that's not going to harm anybody. And so I think it's just kind of a little more, sassy part for myself. I'm like, no, I'm just being selfish, and you can not like it, but this is part of my adventure.
Of that too, because I'm thinking back to my mom and like when I was a kid and stuff, she was like, "Oh, you're selfish." But what was really going on is I was looking out for myself,
Yes.
not doing something that she wanted me to do.
Yep.
I'm not doing what X, Y, or Z wants me to do, then I'm selfish. Also
Well,
the
and you can see where those messages come in early, right? And
yeah.
then, oh gosh, it's so primally imprinted in the 0 to 7 ages. And then we just rinse and repeat that in our relationships and our work and things like that to the point where it becomes part of our fiber. And I think it's so important to separate that out so then we can choose again.
Yeah, and then we're not stuck. I think it's been a journey for me. I'm in my mid 50s now, like rewiring my brain out of those labels that were given to me early.
Yeah.
And just like being like, no, it's not this, it's this. No, it's not this, it's self-care. No, it's not this, it's that. And I think it's really important for us to kind of walk ourselves out of those old labels that really only served them.
Yeah. Well, I had somebody posted online. I can't remember who it is. I need to go back and find to give attribution, but they were talking about this phase of mourning frameworks, and I just have held on to that theme for myself because even the ones that didn't serve me, I'm still mourning them because there was this little kid part of me that looked at the world like good, bad, right, wrong, the good things to do, the bad, and I was raised Catholic, so that just added to it, right? But that is a really simplistic view of the world that is not accurate people are complex, and I have people who I know who do 75% lovely things and then 25% really harmful. Like it's, we are all these complex kind of creatures. And so to take back those labels, as you're saying it, and really own them for who I am right now and what matters to me right now, I think can have such a profound effect, because it is still like, if I don't do that, I'm still a little kid operating in a mid 50s clothing, right? And so, yes, my parents may have reiterated those over and over again, but I'm a grown ass woman. How do I feel about it right now? And again, there was reasons for it. Being a parent, I'm like, trying to keep my kids safe. I don't want them to make the mistakes I've made. I'm trying to keep them out of harm, which is totally impossible to do, but it's your way you feel potent when you're raising children because you're terrified. And so I can understand that. I can have empathy for my parents and what they picked at that point in time, but that doesn't mean I need to keep those scripts running. I can look at them with a bright flashlight and say, okay, which of you serves me and which of you doesn't? And I can, rewrite them. And I feel like that's an ongoing process for us that has just huge payoff when we do it.
Yeah, I think so too. I've done a lot of that work for myself as well as shadow work and kind of getting into like what are those subconscious things that are still running that are affecting me, on a daily basis that's showing up 90% of the time that I'm not even conscious of.
Yes. Yep. Yep. Definitely.
God, I love this. I'm loving our conversation, Barbara, because I think that you're really like this fighter for, self-empowerment and authenticity and truly being yourself and not being afraid to be yourself in the world, also, which is
Well,
really,
and I think about that like, yeah, thank you. I'm thinking back to a time when I think it's really like self-survival in some ways, because if I don't, even for myself, like, then who am I? Do I get to exist? Like, if I'm not the prettiest or the smartest or the most athletic or the this or the that, then like, to what end? What am I here for? And so, that's a very real world thing you can get, bombarded with, right? But my spiritual beliefs are that, the version of God, love, life force, however you want to define it, that is mine is not that. And so I'm not living in alignment with my values when I'm acting that way. I have this script that I run that I fast forward to the end of the days. And if there's such an entity that might be, not the Catholic entity who's checking off, well, you did this much good, you did this much bad, you now get to float in heaven with the harps and the, angels, or you get to burn in hell with the pitchfork and the devil. Like there's, that little kid space. But in my version of it, whatever that entity is like, so how was it? What'd you think? What'd you do? Like that would just really be more engaged in like the fact that this whole experience here was a potential playground. And so going back to that survival piece for myself, like, no, I actually would like to exist here because I picked it. And so if I picked to exist here, I picked the body, I picked the face, I picked the whole thing, right? And I love there's some Japanese proverb, and I don't exactly know what the phrase of it is, but they say like, if there's such thing as, multiple lives, that in this life we pick the face we fell in love with in our last life. And I just like, it moves me to no end because, truth not truth, I'm more of a believer in kind of parallel realities, but what a beautiful, kind, loving sentiment to look at myself in that way, to really think like, gosh, I mean, don't we all just want to be a precious treasure? And I think so much of my life was spent like looking for the thing to do or the person who would or blah, 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 so that I know that I am. But instead, like flipping the script, if I just choose that I am, what's possible out of that? And that's kind of again, I said, don't have it handled, but the adventure that I'm enjoying being on.
and a great adventure too, because I think if we stay in that narrative and we're not flipping the script, we're stealing our joy. And I think
Yes.
life is really about like being in a state of joy, finding happiness. And yes, like, I'm the believer in that too. It's not like the judgment, 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 do this, not that, blah, blah, blah. It's the what did you do today? The excitement, like what do I get to experience today through you?
Well, and I was thinking about that with the selfish word because I believe that, again, if there's parallel lives, I think I've spent a lot of them running this script of sacrificing myself for a bigger whole. I just do. It just feels way familiar and way familiar to the point of like I'm drained out, right? So if I've, played that role a bunch of times, like it's a new experience to try to be a bit selfish. It's a new experience to try to be, driven from my inside out. And by the way, it's not that that all of a sudden means I'm not contributing to a greater whole. I'm finding there's more of me available to care, connect, etc. when I'm starting from the inside out, but it's just contrary to what I think feels familiar.
Yes. So much yes. Okay, for our listeners out there,
Mhm.
like, okay, I'm hearing you, I'm feeling you, but how do I like get out of that voice that keeps on saying I'm not enough?
Yeah. So for me, very practically, I do believe, as silly as it sounds, of giving your not enough voice like a character. You know, picture what that not enough, from again, for me, it's a goofy looking guy, whatever it might be, but to name it, to identify it, etc., because it creates that, instead of being fused to that not enough voice, it creates enough of a distance that then I can catch it and respond to it in a different way. So to me, that's a really essential kind of first step because you need that crack. So because I feel like enough is there all the time. She's whispering instead of screaming at you. She's in the quiet moments in the background, and it's literally like we can't hear her when we're so distracted by the siren of that other voice. And so I think to make that one distinct so that we can do, notice it and then, really turn down the volume. I'm not saying we're going to like, oh, I'll never have a self-doubting thought. Like, yeah, then you're probably in bliss and nirvana and have already elevated to guru status. But we can notice it, turn it down, catch ourselves in those moments and stuff, step off the ladder of comparison. I also think these other pieces like practicing saying the small no's, practicing setting the boundaries, practicing the, catching yourself when you're in the small yeses, just the awareness of it goes a really long way because again, I think these are building blocks that all sort of work together. Like I had a moment the other day that I was so proud of because in the book I talk about, getting outside of your energy lane. And I had one that was so tempting. And it was literally like this group of people were trying to figure something out, and it was a lot of drama. And in the old days, I would have felt so good coming in to rescue and save the day. And they wanted to get on a phone call and figure something out. And I literally said in my text to this person, I said, you know what? I talk about in my book about staying in my energy lane. And, this one's not my lane, but I wish you all the best in whatever it needs to be to resolved. But it would be an error for me to join, and so it's like even those little catching those little opportunities and using them, ongoingly. The other piece I think is really essential over time is uh, seeking out, again, it might not be the friend you've been with for 10, 15 years, but seeking out people who truly believe in these core essential things, believe that we do get to choose, we'll play with you while you're practicing and things like that. And it might be, you might have a group of 7 friends and it's one who gets it, but, increase the time there so that you can have somebody who's really cheering you on as you're practicing, that you can talk to about, hey, guess what I did? Like, even in that one that I'm telling you about, like, I bragged to someone else who knows me and knows this has been a journey. And they're like, high five, way to go. That was a great one,
I love that. And what great tools that we get to add to our toolkit, Barbara. Thank you for sharing those because I know you work with clients all the time coaching them. So you're, bringing some of those coaching skills to our listeners right now. I really appreciate that. Is
Mhm.
there another skill that, that you would have that would kind of help us along if, our listeners are just starting out and, like what is that one thing that you always share with your clients that would benefit our listeners?
I think, there it changes over time, but I will say the one that I feel like has been the most consistent drumbeat lately relates to kind of where you started with these permissions, and it really is reframing. So it's catching myself when I think I have to, I should, etc., and saying I get to. And I think that is giving ourselves the permission for the options. And even if we pick what we've always picked, to notice that the get to opens up the field greater, right? So it's like, oh, I need to go do this thing. Well, I get to go do that thing, but I also get to choose not to. I get to go and suffer. I get to go and enjoy it. I get to blah, 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 blah. So again, just the reframing of it to me has given me more permission to make a variety of choices and to have a lot more options that lead to a more integrated life. Again, my younger self was really looking for a formula to hang into permanently. And life is really beautifully dynamic. And so who we are in this season is not who we were and who we're going to be in the next one. And so I think if we can orient more to the I get you place, then it opens up the permissions to do a lot of different things and to try them out and to really open up that playground. So I think catching and reframing, what we think we should have to and say, gosh, if there was no moral on this, if it was just I get to, and I had to list as many options as possible, what might those be? And you could literally journal it, mark them down. It's the muscle I've had is realizing I have way more choice and a lot of opportunities than I think. I may not like the consequence of that choice. Oh, someone's going to be super angry with me, but it doesn't mean it's not a choice,
Nice. I love that. Thanks for sharing that with us. Thank you,
Yeah.
Barbara. It's been such a pleasure to have you on the show. And this is what a fantastic conversation. Great. I love the book enough. I recommend everybody go out and read it. If they want to find you, if they want to work with you, how do our listeners do that?
Yep. They can go to beenough.com and I've got, a link to the book and also just weekly little touch inspirations folks can sign up for. And the book itself is available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, all those kinds of places.
Nice. Fantastic. And then I always ask one final question, Barbara. What is a jewel of wisdom that you would like to leave our listeners with today?
I think for me, and again, this is the talk I'm increasingly having with myself, which is, that you are absolutely magnificently perfect just as you are with no changes. If nothing else gets achieved, happens, etc., that you are absolutely enough in this very moment and that there's lots of other things you can choose, but there's nothing that needs fixing. There's nothing that needs changing. There's nothing we have to go do to be a complete, precious treasure on the planet, that you are just as you are.
Awesome. Beautiful, Barbara. Isn't that the truth? Thank you so much for that jewel of wisdom. I think that that's a perfect way to end the show. I really appreciate you, Barbara. Thank you for joining me. And yeah, really appreciated hosting you. What a great conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. I appreciate the opportunity.
And thank you, everyone, for joining us again. I'm Liz Peterson, and this is Raise the Vibe with Liz. And you can find everything you need to know about me at raisethevibewithliz.com and at Raise the Vibe with Liz on social media. Thanks, everybody. And remember to get out there and raise the vibe. Bye now.